Hi, everybody. Welcome. So, sounds like maybe one of you was at Keegan's charcuterie event last night, perhaps? Awesome. Wonderful. Very excited. We haven't been at this location in quite some time. So, very quickly, housekeeping. You want to turn off your phones and ringers. The restrooms, those glass rooms that are out there, they're over to the right, and there's a drinking fountain there. You're going to have a really good time. Keegan is awesome. Hopefully you picked up the handouts with the recipes in the back, so please give a warm welcome to Keegan Rodgers.
Thanks. I think I'm on now. Am I on? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. This is 2 nights in a row. I'm so excited. We usually don't do this, but I think it's a lot of fun. I have fun, so hopefully you guys do too. How'd you guys like the charcuterie last night? That was that cheese, that cheddar, that Prairie Breeze cheddar was amazing stuff. Anyway, sorry I digress. We're not here for that tonight. We're here for infusions. And I'm going to go out on a limb and bet everyone in this room has had one today. We'll confirm that, but I'm pretty sure. So I'm Keegan Rodgers, founder and pastry chef of the Lakehouse Bakery. We've been in business this is the beginning of our 7th year, so just over 6 years. And I really, truly cannot believe how long it's been. It's amazing, and I'm so fortunate that I love what I do, so it's not really work. But it kind of is because it's a small business. So I've been in food for 35 years. I love everything about food. My doctor would like me to not like food as much, but it's food. It's chocolate, especially like next week. Y'all, it's chocolate. Anyway, sorry. That's an infusion. I'll pull it together. Actually, it's fruit salad, but we'll go there. I've been a culinary educator for 15 years. I worked at Washtenaw Community College in the culinary program when it was open. My favorite class is bakery science because I'm a geek, if you couldn't tell from any of my other classes. I really am. I own it. So we're going to talk about infusions. We're going to talk about not too much history because there's so much. Infusions have been around since the beginning of food. It's a process. It's a final product. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry annually, and you're gonna, when you kind of dive into it and think about it, you're gonna go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Really does. And literally, I'm not kidding. I would bet everyone in this room has had some sort of an infusion. Okay. Technically, an infusion is a transfer of food into a liquid. Sounds pretty straightforward. There's a couple of ways to do it, but coffee is the coffee and tea are the number one consumed infusions out there. Who's had coffee? Tea? Yep. Yeah. Right, that's it. And there are a couple of other terms of infusions, but that's more medically inclined. We're not talking about that. This is all about food. And the infusions are used primarily for cooking and baking, and of course, beverage making. What do you think kombucha is? It's an infusion. Yeah. So, there are several basic types of infusions. The most common is herbal and tea infusions. Oil infusions, alcohol infusions, but herbal and tea are the most common. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the foods that we'll use. And how you get them is pretty straightforward. You steep the food in a liquid to extract the flavor and nutrients from it into the water. But then you don't eat the food. You just drink the water that's left over. Because coffee grounds are gross. They're really great for plants, I understand, not being or having green thumb at all. I killed spearmint, y'all. I don't do flowers. But I've heard that coffee grounds are good for flowers. I think roses specifically is what I heard, but I don't know if that's true or not. Oil infusions, soaking herbs, spices in oils to create flavored oils for cooking, for further use. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be for cooking. It could be for salad dressing. So if you or restaurants, sometimes you'll see in restaurants, they'll have on the table like a little bottle of oil with some peppers or something in it. That's been infused, so you can use that to heighten the flavor of whatever dish you've got. Alcohol infusions, Now, these are not the same as fermented fruits to get that specific alcohol. So like kirsch, it's not the same thing. This is when you would take something and infuse that food into, let's say, bourbon. So it's not the process of making the alcohol, but a way to flavor it something else. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Then we've got dairy infusions. I personally am I love hot almond milks. They're so yummy. Nice warm glass of milk with some almond infused into it. Vanilla, cinnamon, coffee. They're usually for dessert sauces, but not always. So think of a coffee creme anglaise or a vanilla bean drizzle on your plate. Something along those lines is what that's talking about. Syrup infusions, so if you take maple syrup or corn syrup or agave or something else and add something into it and change the flavor of it, that's what a syrup infusion is. Broths and stocks. So chicken stock, beef stock, fish stock, those are also infusions. They're done pretty much the same basic way, and we'll touch on that in a second. But those are the second most common types of infusions. The first being, coffee and tea, and then stocks and broths. Flavor sources. There's a lot. And I mean pretty much anything. For the most part, for the tea infusions, herbs, spices, and dried flowers. And I've got some examples of what those are. Basil, rosemary, mint, lavender, hibiscus. Hibiscus tea is really quite delicious. Has anybody gone to Pilar's Tamales on Liberty and had her hibiscus tea? Oh my gosh, it's so delicious. You should really try that. Elderflower, rose petals. So you get where I'm going with that. Depending on what you're going to do with it as a final product would depend, of course, what food you're going to use to get the infusion started. You could mix and match flavors like lavender rose, whatever you want. But this is just a basic idea of what you can start with as an infusion. Then we've got roots, barks, and fruit. Ginger, turmeric, burdock root, cinnamon, willow, sassafras. What does sassafras root make? Root beer. Yep. And technically, I believe it's actually illegal in the U.S. to use sassafras root to brew your own root beer. I don't remember exactly why, but you have to actually use, because I wanted to do that once. I thought, how fun would it be to make my own root beer? But you can't find sassafras root as a source. You have to grow it yourself, I guess. Birch, juniper berry. Ew, what? Who's ever had A1 steak sauce? Juniper berries. And any fresh or dried fruit. And we'll talk about how to use those in infusions in a little bit. But again, a wide range of ingredients that you can pull from to get your flavor sources going. Then we've got vegetables, nuts, and beans. Beans? Really? Beans? Yes. Where do you think soy milk comes from? Where do you think tofu comes from? Soy is a bean, it's a legume, and they use the soy to make both of those. So mung bean, chickpea, coffee, cacao, because chocolate, right? Love chocolate. Coconut, hazelnut, almond, any kind of macadamia nut, any kind of nut you can think of. And for vegetables, I just picked those three because I like them. But any vegetable you could possibly think of could be used to make an infusion. Again, it depends on the cuisine that you're going to be using and your flavors that you like. Because that's really the most important part, is that you like what you're doing. Any questions so far? All right. So now that we know what foods you can use, and the answer is pretty much anything you want, what are we going to infuse it into? So the three first basic liquids are going to be oil, water, and vinegar. Water, of course, could be either like a tea, or it could be a stock or a broth. So again, a wide range there. Oils are a little bit more limited. Those are generally going to be used for cooking with. Again, sometimes you could use it as a salad dressing, so like a vinaigrette of some sort. And then vinegar. Anybody ever have a shrub or know what a shrub is? Have you looked at the recipes and saw the watermelon mint shrub and were like, what the heck is that? A shrub is a drinking vinegar. It's specifically designed, it's actually quite refreshing, and it's designed for you to have on a hot summer day. They're really quite tasty. So it's like a non-carbonated beverage that has a really refreshing palate cleansing effect. They're really quite tasty. But there's also spirits, alcohol, and juice. Now, spirits and alcohol, some people think they're the same. Some of it is how it's distilled. Some of it is the alcohol content. But I separated them out pretty much for like really hard, heavy, white, clear liqueurs and really heavy, dark brown, like bourbons, that kind of thing. And fruit juice. Again, insert favorite fruit juice here. Could be whatever you want. Syrups, milks, creams, butter. And again, I separated the milk, cream, and butter because technically it's the same source, but they are three very different products. In syrup, I mean maple syrup, corn syrup, agave nectar. Honey would count as a syrup, so you see where I'm going with that one. Milk, we kind of touched on that one earlier. Cream, very similar to milk, so if you're making a creme anglaise or a nice dessert sauce, that would be it. Butter. Anybody ever take garlic and infuse butter, make a compound, right? Compound butters are amazing. They're so good. They're so easy to make, and they add a really nice touch to whatever you're making because it deepens the flavor on it, and they're so incredibly easy to make. And we'll touch on how to do just that in a minute. So to do the infusing, there are two basic ways to do it. The traditional method, which is the absolute easiest thing in the world to do, and the modernist method. Now, what do I mean by modernist? There's a series of books that came out in the early 90s called Modernist Cuisine. There's two versions. There's Modernist Cuisine, which is a 6-volume set, and there's Modernist Bread, which I think is a 5-volume set. They're several $1,000s, and it breaks down the modernist cuisine movement. And the modernist movement is using lab techniques to fast pace original traditional techniques and get the same product. Now, there's some argument, and I'm one of them, that says that no matter what, you can't quickly replicate the original way of doing something. People have been doing it for centuries for a reason, and just because you can come up with some really cool ways to do it doesn't mean that it's going to be as good as. It will certainly be quicker, but it might not necessarily be as good as doing it the traditional method. Traditional method, there's really only 3 ways to do it: cold, steep, and simmer. And we'll talk about those in a minute. In the modernist, and I'll talk about what each of these are in a bit more detail: a whipping siphon, a sous vide, fat washing, and a vacuum. Anybody have heard those terms before? Sous vide or fat washing? How about a whipping siphon? Yeah, we're gonna go into those. But sous vides actually are not relatively new. They've been around for quite a while. I want to say almost 45 years now. It was a Swiss, I want to say Swiss, but I might be wrong on that, invention back in the 70s, early 70s, late 60s. So it's been around for quite a while. It's new to the U.S. in the last, I'd say, 15, 20 years. But the process sous vide has been around for quite a while. So, traditional, cold infusing. Anybody ever have cold brew coffee? That's it. The process is extraordinarily simple, especially with cold brew coffee. Cold brew, you grind the coffee beans, you soak it in some cold water for X hours. You pull out the coffee beans, ta-da, you have cold brew coffee. That's it. That's all there is to it. How about sun tea? Anybody ever make sun tea? Yep, that's considered a cold brew or a cold process because you're not heating the water in any way. The sun warms it gently, but it never goes above, I'd say, 90 degrees. It depends on how hot it is, of course. But you're not applying a heat source to it to heat the water up to extract the flavor. The sun and the cold is doing it for you. And again, it's been around forever. Cold infusing is better for syrups, especially honey, so that you don't degrade the honey. Just put the flowers or the whatever you want in it and let it sit. The only drawback to cold infusing is the time. It does take, depending on how flavor forward you want the infusion to be, it could take days, it could take weeks. It could take months. So if you got some time on your hands, why not? Steeping, you bring liquid to a boil, you pour it over, and you let the food infuse into the hot liquid as it cools down. Now, depending on what it is, especially if it's tea, there are some that argue, and I will not dispute this, that there's the perfect temperature for the water to be before infusing the tea and or coffee. Not being a coffee or tea guy, I believe them, sure. I don't know that you got to get that specific about it, but I'm certain it does enhance the flavor. But the difference with this is you boil the water, is the next method. And again, this one's relatively quick because it doesn't take long to boil water. You know, a couple of minutes, depending if you've got one of those electric kettles or an induction cooktop. Any way to heat the water to get it to a soft boil. Do y'all know the difference between a soft boil and a roiling boil? Soft boil is bubbles, small bubbles all over the surface. A roiling bubble is violent bubbles, big, all over the place.
I like the violent.
Depending on what you're doing, you got to be careful with it though, but that could be exactly what you want, is a roiling versus a soft boil. But soft boil works for tea or coffee. Okay, and then simmering. Simmering is when you would want a roiling boil. That's the main difference. And you can see the bubbles in here. You can see the big bubbles in there. And that's how you get your stocks in your broths. That's how you get those thicker, heartier type of infusions. You put everything in the pot with some cold water, bring it to a boil, and let it boil for several hours, depending on what you're doing. So fish stock, maybe an hour. Beef stock or chicken stock, maybe 2, maybe 3. Depends on how delicate the food is. So fish being a bit more delicate than beef stock. So again, your flavor and however much you want to do with it. When you're using the simmer method to do this, don't keep adding water. You'll get your pot on and you'll see that there'll be a line where you started around the side of the pot. If you keep adding water, you're diluting the infusion and you're watering it down. So you want it to kind of shrink down in the pot a little bit. And that is how you know, A, it's evaporating out some, and B, the nutrients are being pulled out. So don't keep adding water. Yep. And it's nice and thick. Yep. All right. So modernist. That is a whipping siphon. You've probably seen one and just didn't realize that's what it was called. It uses nitrous oxide to force the infusion to happen. And there's a couple ways that this happens. But this is what it looks like, and these are the nitrous oxide. So this is the canister that has the liquid in it, and you put the liquid and the food source in it. The nitrous goes in here, and then this is where it comes out. And the nitrous containers they're not very big. And they usually, depending on if you just put whipped cream in a whipping siphon and have a container, you can just whip cream. It will come out whipped cream. You don't have to whip it on a machine. So depending on how much is in there and what you're trying to do with it, could either be whipped cream or an infusion. And that will make sense now. Add the liquid and flavoring agent, charge the NO2, insert the cartridge, shake it for 30 seconds to 2 minutes. That's it. So that's kind of nice. Then you allow the pressure to, the nitrous oxide, like I said, the pressure that's created in there forces the infusion together so that the flavor can't go anywhere but into the liquid. And then you gently, slowly release the valve, and you can see the pressure coming off. You unscrew the top, and boom, it's infused. So you don't necessarily have to bring it out of the whipping siphon to like dispense it, but the canister inside is actually doing the work for you. And depending on what your food source was, you'd want to strain that out. So you'd pour it from there through a strainer so that it catches whatever you were using for the flavor to infuse the liquid. Does that make sense?
What would you use that for?
This you can, I'm seeing if I have a variety of things, typically drinks. Some oils, so like a mayonnaise, you could do like an aioli with it, so put the mayo in it. You could use it for smaller, much syrups, vinegars, mostly cocktails. Some baristas I've seen try and do syrups that way at coffee houses. But again, not being a coffee guy, that's not something I would generally do. But I have seen it where they use it for salad dressing.
So how much would that cost?
Whipping siphons are about $50 to $75 for the unit. I've seen them as high as $250. Those are all stainless steel, like really hoity-toity kind of ones. But you also have to buy the cartridges and refill those, and I don't know the expense on those, so I have to check that out. But the siphon itself can range, is not terribly expensive, but it could get expensive. And then, like I said, the recharging, because the NO2 cartridges generally come like 6 to a pack. So I want to say last time I checked, it was like $25 for a pack of 6. And the number one reason to use it is it's so fast. Like 30 seconds to 2 minutes. That's like no time. It is a more intense flavor. I don't know how long that flavor lasts. And that's the only concern that I would have with using it. It does reduce exposure to air, so it does preserve the color and flavor some. And we'll talk about shelf life on infusions in a little bit. But that's the whipping siphon, and that's how that process works. Any questions on that one? All right, so sous vide. Sous vide machines, when they first came to the U.S., were fairly expensive. They were running about $1,000 a unit. Now they're down to about $100. And all you really need is, this is the sous vide machine. That's all you need. You do need a canister of some sort, because what you're doing is you're taking food and the flavor and you're vacuum sealing it together. And they're going to gently, you put it in the water, and this contraption gently warms the water to about 140, maybe 150 degrees, and it circulates it so that it gently infuses and cooks whatever is in the vacuum packed. It's a controlled water bath, essentially, that you don't add the liquid, you're just doing it in liquid, but because it's vacuum sealed together, the flavors stay in the food. Pretty much the same basic process, combined with a liquid medium in a vacuum sealed bag. It's submerged in a sous vide water bath between 120 to 160 degrees. The heat accelerates the infusion process so that as it's warming, because we all know that heat expands, and as it's expanding, the flavors can then go into those spaces. And it is a deep flavor extraction, and it doesn't take very long. Yeah.
So like in the slide previous when they were doing the salmon, you
Yeah.
have to cook it?
No.
Okay, it does cook the meat.
Yep, it will cook it completely through. It takes a lot longer to cook it. If you just want to infuse the salmon and then grill it, you could do that. So it looks like that's a rosemary sprig. So, and maybe some lemon juice on there. I don't know what's in that one. But so with that, you would infuse for like half hour and then open the vacuum seal, take it out, and then grill it. But you could leave it in there to cook. It'll also do, a lot of restaurants, it was a big thing in the early, 2010-ish era. Restaurants had 3 or 4 of them. They would sous vide the steak and then to get it cooked and then pop it on the grill to get the caramelization on it. It's a gimmick. I mean, there's nothing like grill to get the grill. Anyway.
So wait, you could do this with chicken, and chicken would be safe to eat?
If you cooked it thoroughly through, yes.
This takes time.
It takes a lot of, and we're talking maybe 3-4 hours, depending on how thick the chicken is. Like you could potentially put a whole chicken in the bag with all the vegetables and all the stuff that you want the chicken flavored with, seal it up, and if the container is big enough, put the whole thing in the container and turn your sous vide on, and over a series of hours, the hot water, warm water I should say, because it's really only 160 degrees, would circulate around it, and it would eventually cook it. To infuse, if you just want the flavors infused in the chicken, you'd only do it for like a half hour, 45 minutes. Then you'd pull it out and then cook it to finish it so you can eat it. But you can cook with the sous vide method. Yeah. All right. Why? Because it's fast. The chefs I've talked to said that it is a lot more flavor control because they're controlling the temperature. They control exactly the portion of food that's in it. They control the flavor that's in it. And then the time, of course. It preserves delicate aromas. So if you've got something very soft and delicate like saffron, you're not losing any of the flavonoids that are escaping into the atmosphere. They're stuck right there in that bag. And saffron is too expensive to let any part of it escape. It is the single most expensive spice on the planet. And it's pretty versatile. And I have seen it used for, so you could put liquid in the bag, seal it up, vacuum seal it, with whatever, like you want to do like a bacon maple syrup. You could put cooked bacon with maple syrup in the bag, vacuum seal it, and sous vide it. And get a bacon maple syrup, which is not a flavor profile I would enjoy, but I know people out there do. I mean, generally bacon, but yeah. So fat washing. This is a relatively new process, and it is exactly what it says. You are steeping, essentially, the food in fat. Now, fat is where it's at. That's where the flavor is. And I don't care like what kind of fat it is, it's good stuff. We were in the process of rendering some lard that a customer gave us at the bakery, and we pulled off just about a gallon and a half this morning. And the smell, and we're going to make some biscuits with that. Because it's lard, y'all. Lard's gotten a bad rap. It really has. And I'm not talking about that brick of white stuff in the grocery store that's been bleached within an inch of its life. I'm talking about heirloom lard that you can actually buy now in the store that says heirloom lard, that's from heirloom hogs, and it's processed the right way, and it's slow, and it still has a little bit of color to it, and it's not bleached. It's really good. Typically, butter and bacon fat are the two that are going to be used primarily for fat washing. I have seen coconut fat, but because that has a very strong flavor of its own, you only want to use something like that with flavors that pair really well with coconut. So shrimp, right? You could fat wash some shrimp and have coconut shrimp even more coconutty. It does leave a very rich mouthfeel. And this might be hard to explain. All right, so who's ever had an American buttercream frosting that had that oil slick feel on the roof of their mouth? That really nasty, plasticky, shortening feel. And then you bite into a piece of bread with some really good butter. And you feel in your mouth the difference between the shortening and the butter. That's what I mean. There's a richness that fat washing lends that you don't get from the other types of infusing. And this is why. So the liquid fat is warmed, mixed with the infusion base, bourbon, rum, I like where they're going. Sits at room temperature for a few hours. Overnight, it's perfectly fine. Then you refrigerate it. And what happens to fat when you refrigerate it? It becomes solid. So once it's solid, you carefully pick off all the fat, and the liquid you're left with is what you would use. Now, you could use the fat in some other way, because it has the flavor of whatever you infused it in, but you don't use the fat. And by separating it out, you can clearly see the separation there because oil and water don't mix. And fat and acid actively repel one another. By doing it this way, you're infusing more of those flavors and you're getting that rich mouthfeel I keep talking about that you can't get with just sous videing something. Yeah, because it's without that greasy, and there's no other way for me to describe it, but that, and you know, when you've had some cheap buttercream, you know there's like a, you know it. We don't do that at the bakery, by the way. We don't, it's all Swiss buttercream, real European butter. Sorry, just had to clarify that. I'm sorry?
Nice pun.
Hey, thanks. Yeah. And why would we do it? Mouthfeel. Because it's really true. I mean, when we take a bite of something that feels weird, we kind of don't want to swallow it. So that oil slick on the roof of your mouth, right? Like that's not appetizing, and you're not going to want to finish that. So the number one reason is the mouthfeel, the richness that the fat imparts into the liquid. And you could go all kind of directions with this. So it's very versatile. And depending on the alcohol that you're using, it could soften that very astringent alcohol flavor, right? Because anybody ever have Everclear? Oh, you could like breathe fire. You could start cars with that stuff, I think. Well, if you use fat washing to infuse Everclear with something in it, the fat washing will kind of tone down that astringency, so it's not quite as, right? Like you don't quite get that feeling. And it is extremely versatile. Like the flavor opportunities are pretty wide. So that's why we would use it.
So what's in that jar?
I think it's cheese. I was wondering the same thing, and I kept looking at it, but my suspicion is it's cheese. Or that might be the fat that they're pouring it into, the liquid into, to get the fat into that liquid. It's. It could be green onions.
Like the white parts of the
Yeah. It could be any one of those, and they would all work for fat washing. Yeah. So a vacuum. So the difference with this and the sous vide is there's no water involved, right? You put the food in with your spices, and you force it in because you're removing the air so that there's nowhere else for the flavors to go. So it's essentially the first part of a sous vide, but without the water circulating around it. Placed in a vacuum sealed bag. with the liquid left to be infused, air is removed, creating a negative pressure. That negative pressure forces the flavors into it, and then let it sit for as long as you want. And this is the part that I don't really have a guide for, because it depends on the food and it depends on the flavor and what you want to achieve with the vacuum and with the infusion. But as soon as you open the vacuum, the ingredient retains the liquid within its cell, creating like a remember the gum that had the burst stuff in the middle? I don't remember the name of that gum, but it's kind of like that. So that it's in there. I don't remember the Cinnaburst or something, I don't remember. And why? Fast penetration. It gets in to the cellular structure of the food quickly. Hours instead of days. Even distribution, since it's all in a vacuum, all of it gets evenly distributed. Because if you're fat washing or if you're sous videing it, and you put, like, say, the lemon or the whatever on one side but not the other, then that side is going to have more flavor than the other. But doing it this way, it's all going to have flavor because it's all evenly being sucked into the food. Texture, again, depending on what it is, it could change the texture, soften or firm it up. And you're reducing air exposure, so it's going to keep it a little bit cleaner.
Do you have to worry about microplastics getting in your food?
Typically not, because these are going to be an FDA-approved plastic for just that reason, so that it doesn't leach anything in. But that's a great question. Yeah. All right, so the two side by side. With traditional, all you need is a container and time. I mean, the container should have a tight-fitting lid, but like that's it. And they're cheap. A gallon mason jar, a quart mason jar. Like any container you can find that has a tight-fitting lid can be used to infuse whatever you want, which is the beauty in it. And it really is, in my opinion, the only way to fully replicate exactly what you want every time, because you know what you put into it every time and you know how long you let it sit. Once you play with it and find your exact flavor, it's pretty amazing. And this really, to me, is the only way to do that. The flavors will mellow with time, and that's okay. Make smaller batches and use them up if you don't want that part to happen. It does take time. We're going to talk about a product in a little bit that takes up to 6 months. So it can take a long time. With the Modernist, it is some specialized equipment. Even if it's just the vacuum sealer machine itself is fairly specialized. They're not that expensive. So I think I've seen them on Facebook Marketplace for like $50. But like I said, a whipping siphon can be $250. I've seen sous vide machines, $150, $175. Fat washing is also pretty straightforward and fairly inexpensive. You just got to have a really good source of fat. Good fat, not just a good source, but good fat. You'll alter the flavor based on the method used. So if you use a whipping siphon to get the flavor one time, and then the next time you use fat washing, it's going to be a completely different flavor. So if you want the same flavor, use the whipping siphon, and you know that's what you want, then stick with that one. The time is almost negligible. But like I said, it can be expensive depending on the equipment that you're using. Any questions so far? All right, so some guidelines. There aren't any. There are no rules. It is the Wild West. Go hog wild. Do whatever your little heart desires. I just want you to be happy. Because it's your flavors. There are 7 billion people on the planet, and there's 7 billion different palates, 7 billion different types of, like, I can't do pepper. My girlfriend loves it. So whatever you want, whatever your favorite foods are, you can use to infuse. Now, there are a couple of guidelines, but there are no hard and fast rules. And the guidelines really are just time, temperature, pressure, flavor source, makeup strength, and the liquid being used. So let's kind of talk about that. If you're using fruits, vegetables, and berries, the first thing I want to say, and I know I have it at the bottom, but it should be the number one thing is do not, under any circumstances, use bruised or old fruit. It must be at the peak of freshness and ripeness. If you use bruised or old fruit, the chances you're going to create an alcohol are very high. Has anybody ever gone and seen the videos of drunk animals eating rotten fruit? That's hysterical. But there's a reason we watch those, and it's so funny. But you don't want to do that because it could create an alcohol that you don't want that effect on. So peak freshness. So go to the apple orchard, pick it yourself, and use, process it from there. And by process it, I mean, cut it into small bits. Do whatever your final product you want to do. Like if you want to make apple pie and the apple's infused with cinnamon, and you want to vacuum seal the cinnamon and the apple together, have the apples already in the final state that you want them, then vacuum seal them with the cinnamon or nutmeg or whatever. Equal parts fresh or frozen. So if it's fresh fruit or if it's frozen, it doesn't matter if it's a pound. It would be the same in terms of the amount used to infuse. A cup of dried or dehydrated to 2 cups of liquid is a good ballpark to start with. That totally depends on the liquid you're using. If it's water, you might want to go a little less water. If it's orange juice, you might want to go a little more, or vice versa. Again, your flavor profile, whatever you're looking for. If it's a citrus, go for the zest. In the zest, you want to make sure that you don't get the pith. So a friend of mine, God love her, she ate the orange peel and all. Whew. I couldn't watch her. Yeah.
So why shouldn't you use the actual fruit in the jar or citrus?
Because there's more oil in the zest than in the pulp. So the juice is great to juice, but once you've juiced that out, the flavonoids are really in the peel itself. And the peel itself is just that very, very outer bit. As soon as you start to see some white, whether it's a lime, a lemon, an orange, a clementine, a grapefruit, you've gone too far, and that's the pith that I'm talking about, and that's the part that's bitter. Now, if you're candying them, which is a completely separate process, you want all of that because that's what becomes the candy. But for infusing, the oils are in the zest, and that's where the flavor really has the biggest punch. The other thing for citrus fruits specifically is the pulp becomes problematic in terms of infusing. It's also not the most palatable. And the pulp will interfere with the infusion process, so you don't want to do that. If you dry or dehydrate, like Trader Joe's has freeze-dried and dehydrated like mango or raspberries, right? That will impart a more concentrated flavor because the liquid has already been removed from it. Specifically with freeze drying or like dried mango. I could eat my weight in dried mango. Stuff is so good, right? It is very expensive. But because the liquid has already been pulled out of it, I'm going to need to adjust my liquid a bit more for that unless I want a really concentrated infusion. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, cool. Teas. Now, again, not being a coffee or tea guy, I'm going to assume this is right. So about 2 tablespoons to a cup of liquid. Now, the caveat with the cup is not every cup equals 8 ounces. Right? There is a vast difference between weight and volume. So I'm assuming that for tea, you're going to use water. And in that specific case, it is. A cup is 8 ounces. In the culinary world, there's only 3 things where a cup equals 8 ounces. That's water, cream, and milk. And the thing they all have in common is their viscosity. So that's the caveat to a cup. Like if you want to infuse tea into honey, it might be a completely different measurement. So just bear that in mind as you're doing that. Because some chamomile honey, some ginger honey, why not? And if you're, again, sun tea versus English tea, right? If you're simmering the water to make your tea, it will change the flavor versus sun tea. So just bearing that in mind that either method could change the flavor. And again, not being a tea guy, I've heard that sun tea is a bit mellower in flavor. Do y'all know that that's true? I don't.
Make it on a hot day, and you can do it on your porch, or best, on the dashboard of your car.
Oh yeah, that good and hot.
Your car gets extra hot.
Yep. Other foods. If you can eat it, you can infuse it. Generally speaking, about a quarter of a cup or 2 ounces to about 2 ounces to 8 ounces. That's a good ratio, depending on the food and depending on the liquid. If it's a really flavor-forward something, you might not want 2 ounces. You might only want 1. If the liquid you're using has its own flavor profile, you might want a little more than 2 ounces. You might want to go 3.5 ounces, so that it can compete, although it shouldn't compete, it should nicely contrast the flavor of the liquid that you're starting with. You want it to complement each other. You don't want to put like chocolate and garbanzo beans. Like that would not be a good flavor pairing. You see where I'm going with that? All right. Yeah. Hard candies. Oh, yeah. So Jolly Ranchers, Red Hots, in any alcohol spirits. I think everyone at one point or another has done that. Even if it's 7-Up, right? Where do you think they got Fireball from? Red Hots. The Cinnamon Jolly Ranchers. Cured meats, absolutely. Yep. We did the class on charcuterie last night. Could you imagine using bacon to infuse some cheese? Could you imagine bacon to infuse anything? Maybe not garbanzo beans. Oh, maybe. Cured meats work really well with the fat washing method. Pepperoni, salami, and they also work with vinegar and oil. So you could make a really great salad dressing with some prosciutto. Sounds really good. Yeah.
You did a charcuterie event last night?
I did. It was at the Westgate branch.
Oh,
I know. It was so much fun. And we ate afterwards. If you're using alcohol, vodka, whiskey, rum, high grain, any high percentage alcohol. With vanilla being as expensive as it is, a lot of people are buying vanilla bean and making their own vanilla extract. And the best way to do that is just pop a couple beans in a bottle of vodka. Let it sit for a while. When vanilla was a lot cheaper, I bought a gallon of bourbon vanilla extract and added 15 or 20 beans to that. And then I just kept adding vanilla to that jug and letting the beans seep. The deep vanilla flavor on that was so incredible. But then vanilla beans became really expensive. It's the second most expensive spice on the planet, right behind saffron. Yep. Stronger flavored spirits use flavors that complement each other. So cherries and brandy. It's a great flavor pairing right there. And as you're doing it, if you're not doing it the modernist way, which I'm going to assume most of you aren't, taste it as you go so that you know how long to let it sit next time. Anybody ever have limoncello? That's an infusion. It will last indefinitely in a dark cabinet because it's alcohol. So start with a small batch to find the flavor profile you like with what you're making. And then once you found it and you like it and you want to replicate it, then make a larger batch because it'll keep forever. And that's why most alcohols are brown bottles to keep the light out. So as long as it's a dark, cool cabinet, it'll stay. Vinegar. Now, I do like vinegar, but white vinegar is just so harsh. It's such an astringent flavor. So try not to use that if you're going to make a shrub. Apple cider vinegar works really well. White wine, rice wine vinegar works really well. And it will last quite a while, a couple months. Again, because not so much that there's no alcohol in it, but because it's vinegar. I mean, there's a smaller percentage. I think most grocery stores have a 3% alcohol. It might be 5. Like it'll say, table white vinegar is 5%, but or the apple cider will say the percentage of alcohol in it, but it's under 5 or for sure under 10.
So you don't have to put it in the refrigerator?
You don't have to, no. The vinegar is a preservative of sorts, so it will be fine. And again, sometimes I've seen in Mexican restaurants, they'll have a little bottle of vinegar with little peppers down in there. They keep those things out all the time. Oils. Now, if you're going to use an oil to infuse, you want to make sure that it's thoroughly cleaned and that the container you're putting it in is thoroughly cleaned and that the food that you're going to put in there has been thoroughly cleaned. It doesn't have to be cooked, of course, but it does have to be clean. Make sure that there's no bits on it that you don't want. It is best to refrigerate the oils once it becomes infused. Once it's infused, it becomes a compound food, and it does have opportunity for microbial growth, which we don't want. The oil that you're using will absolutely impact the final flavor. Especially if you're using something like avocado oil, olive oil. Do you know how many flavors of olive oil there are out there? Hundreds. So even within the olive oil realm, if you're using the one that you like, and for some reason the store's out and you get another one, it's going to change the flavor. It just will. Canola, grapeseed have a neutral flavor profile. Corn oil is also fairly neutral. So you could start with something that's pretty neutral and kind of go from there. But if you're using something like an avocado or a walnut or a hazelnut or an olive oil, that it would change it. Do you know the difference between olive oil and olive oil pomace? Sometimes you'll see on the store, it'll say olive oil pomace underneath it. The extra virgin olive oil is the olives themselves being pressed and the liquid that comes from that. The pomace is the olives with pit, that it's ground into a mash, and then remember when we were kids, we went to the apple orchard, and they had the mash of apples, and they put the stuff around it, and they just layered it, and they kept doing that, and then they squeezed. That's the cider. So it's the same concept as the pomace for the olive oil versus just the olives themselves. They're both perfectly acceptable to use, but they will have a different flavor profile. Couple weeks on this, several, not too many. So again, make smaller batches and use up what you want. Stocks, broths, coffee, tea. Again, that's the one that most of us will have consumed. Coffee, tea, if not on a daily basis. monthly for stocks, because soups, right? Love soup. Hot, steeping, and simmering are best with water. For juice, cold. Use a complementary flavor for the juice so that it's so that you've got a really nice flavor palette coming in and it's not weird. But those only the juice, I think I have this worded weirdly. The juice infusions are generally only like a week. So don't keep them very long. The water infusions, like if it's stock, also a week, but you can freeze it. Don't freeze a juice infusion. I suppose you could freeze coffee. I mean, it's not the same as iced coffee, but I have seen where people take coffee and put it in ice cube trays and then use that for stuff. Yeah.
Is it the same thing as you were saying earlier? Is it like because of alcohol production, not freezing the juice ones?
No, if you freeze the juice infusions, the ice crystals actually cut into the juice and it changes the structure of the juice. It makes it, it thins it out, which is kind of weird.
Oh, I've had like the concentrated ones that you get.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a bit weirder, so don't recommend it. Oh, a little side note, because again, I'm a geek. Did you know that ice cube trays were invented in Detroit? Yeah. Bitters. So bitters are, who's had bitters? Who's had an old fashioned? It's my favorite drink, right? Love it. Bitters are an offshoot of an alcohol infusion. Bitters have been around for a little over a century and a half-ish. And the one that we're most familiar with is the Angostura bitters. And they're the only alcohol that was successfully able to be served during Prohibition because it has medicinal purposes. And it was intended that way from the beginning. It just also has a pretty high alcohol content. And you still have to be 21 to buy it from the store. Like, not kidding. Yeah. It's a 4+ week process to make. There's a variety of bitters out there, but the idea is that they are almost exclusively used in cocktail making. Again, it does, depending on the ingredients being used, it can have some medicinal purposes, but for the most part, it's just to really flavor up some cocktails. Since it's an offshoot of an alcohol infusion, it'll last several months indefinitely, but the flavor will start to fade over time. Yeah. Syrups, the most common syrup that people can make at home on their own is called simple syrup. It's a 1-to-1 ratio of water and syrup boiled. Once you boil it, what I find, if you're going to make your own at home, add a little honey to it. Because if you don't, after about a week or so, it will start to recrystallize. Adding the honey will actually help prevent that from happening. Honey is considered, honey, corn syrup, agave nectar, molasses, any thick syrupy sugar are considered an inverted sugar. And that will, I don't want to get too geeky on you, but let's just say a sugar molecule looks like this. An inverted sugar molecule looks like this. What happens is when you boil the sugar-water mixture, the inverted sugar molecule kind of comes in and helps stop the crystals from reforming. I mean, they really don't look like that because that's my fingers, but you get the idea. There's the next step up from that is called a rich syrup, and it's 2-to-1 sugar water. So if you start with a gallon of water and a gallon of sugar, which is 128 ounces, then you would have a gallon of simple syrup. You wouldn't have 2 gallons because the sugar melts into the water. But if you wanted to do a rich syrup, you would do 128 ounces of sugar to 64 ounces of water. See the difference? Bars typically do a 1-to-1. Lots of coffee houses, when you go in, they have their array of condiments. They'll have a container of simple syrup. That's the 1-to-1. But again, you can make that at home pretty easily. Again, equal parts water, sugar, boil it. And then once you've got that syrup made, infuse it with whatever you want. Bacon. You can use other syrups, of course, as a base. Maple syrup, agave, corn syrup. Several weeks in a dark cabinet, but it is best in refrigeration once it's infused. Again, we don't want microbes to be growing on anything unless you like mushrooms. No, I'm sorry, just kidding. That's anyway. Cream and milk infusions, gently heat and then flavor. Gently heat with the flavor and then cool it down. They are typically not stored in any way and typically used immediately. There are a few rare exceptions, and right now, of course, I can't think of what it is, but for the most part, you would make the milk infusion, the cream infusion, and then use it right away. Food. And this covers everything else. And that's a pretty big category. Vacuum is generally going to be the best way to do it. So you'd have, let's say, potatoes. You slice your potatoes, you put them in the vacuum bag, you put whatever you want to flavor the potatoes with in there, the liquid. Seal it up, remove the air as it's being sealed, and then leave it alone. And again, as that happens, the pores are being opened and the liquid is going to go in. So the vacuum method really, if you think about it, is the reverse of all the other methods. Because the other methods, you're infusing the liquid. With the vacuum method, you're infusing the food. Does that make sense? Keep the infusion in the refrigerator. You can use other infused things to infuse other foods. So if you've got some, let's say, some garlic olive oil, some garlic infused olive oil, and you want to use that garlic infused olive oil to infuse something else, that's where I'm going with that one. But those are generally used right away. Any questions so far? All right. So you have a couple of recipes. For limoncello, a Tuscan olive oil, an Angostura style of bitters, some watermelon shrub. Now, they're fairly easy to make at home, except the bitters, because that will take quite a while. And I threw that one in because it's the most iconic of the bitters, and it's just got a really cool history. It started in the Caribbean, and it's been the same family, and no one really knows exactly what's in it. It's an even more closely guarded secret than Colonel Sanders' spices. And I'm not kidding. There's rumors that, like 5 people have the recipe for it, but each one only has a fifth of the recipe. And when they need to make more, they come in sequence to put in what they know to make it. There's rumors that only 5 people know how to make it, and each one is scattered around the world. I mean, there's a whole conspiracy theories about the whole process of making it. It's kind of cool if you do some digging on it. It's a really neat story. But no one really knows for sure what's in it. So this is why it's an Angostura style. I think this is what's in it, but probably not. And they're pretty straightforward infusions. They're easy enough to do at home with a traditional method. You don't have to buy anything expensive. The ingredients can be. So for the limoncello, for example, you could use Meyer lemons, but there is a specific type of Italian lemon that the name is eluding me at the moment that is what's traditionally used to make limoncello. But it's like $150 a case. It ain't cheap. A friend of mine makes it every year for all of our friends, and she has a hard time finding it. She can't just go to Meyer and get it. I think she has to call Plum Market, and they have to special order it for her. But you absolutely could use Meyer lemons. You could do a limoncello, right? So do limes and lemons and make it. And the watermelon shrub, I threw that one in because it's an old-timey drink. It's really, I know you're thinking vinegar, drinking vinegar, really? Trust me, it really is good. But you got to start early enough so that you have it ready to go for summer. But it doesn't take very long either. Fairly straightforward. But watermelon and mint, you can't go wrong with that flavor combination either, can you? Pretty tasty. Any questions? Yeah.
All right, I still don't understand this water bath. So it's like in a crock pot?
Nope.
What are we cooking it in? Is a special,
You've got a bucket.
it's a special bucket.
Nope, a bucket. Any, do you go to restaurants, they have the bus tubs? Right? You ever see the stuff?
Where does the heat come from, though?
Right, so the machine itself, the sous vide machine, has the heat source in it. So it's, let me flip back to,
It has an electric that just heats and circulates the water.
yep. All right, so you can kind of see it a little bit better here. So this goes down into the water, into the bottom of the pot. There's a heating element and a fan in here that you set the temperature on the head, and the fan starts the water circulating around in a circle. And as it goes through this, there's openings on the sides, and as it goes through there, there's a heating element in the middle, and it gently heats the water as it goes by it.
I thought you said it needs a lid. It doesn't have a lid.
Nope, you don't need a lid. And if I said that, I apologize. That was not correct.
It's got a thermostat, so it's maintaining that
Yep.
temperature.
Yep, and that's what's in here. This computer in here is telling it what temperature you want it and to maintain that temperature. And you tell it how much, typically they have a time setting on there as well. So you tell it 150 degrees for 3 hours and you hit start. And the impeller blade will start the water circulating and the heating element in the middle will start warming up. And it will stay warm and keep the water circulating around for 3 hours or however long you tell it.
So is this one of those things you can set, go to work, and come back? Or your house going to be on fire?
It won't be on fire. I wouldn't recommend it because it's not quite that long. It's generally going to be 3 to 4 hours. It wouldn't be something as long like a crock pot where you could do up to 8 hours. Unless you want to come home at lunch and set it up and have it ready by the time you get back. It wouldn't do a whole day, but it would do 3 to 4 hours. Did that help?
Yeah.
All right, let me go. Questions? Yeah. There we go, questions. Any other questions? Yeah.
What's your favorite infusion that you've made?
My favorite infusion is the shrub.
It is intriguing.
It is. It's really good. I was surprised because a friend of mine and I also do a series here at the library called Dining by Decades. And maybe we need to bring that back here, and we haven't done that in a while. And we started talking about old-timey foods. And shrubs were very popular in the 20s and 30s because they were cheap ingredients. And you could make a lot of it for family and church functions, which social functions were really big at that time. So, and that's how we got talking about it. So we're like, let's make one. And it was really pretty good.
So you sip that, or you could like mix it with like sparkling water?
Yes, both. Yep. Any other questions? So, the bakery, we do hands-on classes. So we don't do a class on infusions because it would take too long. And as much as I love y'all, I don't have room to put you up for like 4 weeks. But we do hands-on classes at the bakery. Pasta, artisan breads, French macaron. Sunday is chocolate 101. Alternative baking, which is nice because it's gluten-free vegan baking. We've got flatbreads is a new class this year, so we're learning all about flatbreads. So check out our website to see what classes we've got coming up. See if you're interested in some of those. And of course, check back at the library for all of the classes here. I thought I had a resource. Two books that you should check out to start your infusion journey is the Flavor Bible and the Vegetarian Flavor Bible by Karen Page. And Aaron and I've been, every single class I do has that on there, and I think every branch now has them. So the nice thing about those books is it lists every food that you can think of in them. And then underneath it, it lists all the other foods that pair well with it. So it gives you a really good place to start kind of playing with some flavors without having to go buy the ingredients and wonder, is this really going to taste good or not? Someone else has already done that research for you. So it's a good place to start and go, I wonder, I have this in my cabinet. I wonder what would go well with it. And then you can look at that food and it will tell you what goes well with it. So I do recommend those two books. They're my favorite cookbooks, and there's not a recipe in any one of them because it's just all about the food. And that's what I've got for you tonight. So thanks. I appreciate it. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.